There is a moment, and if you grew up in a chaotic home, you know exactly the one I am talking about, where your body would do something before your brain even had time to think. For example, the sound of a car in the driveway at the wrong hour, or the slam of a door, or the tone of someone's voice, and your whole system, without your permission, would just brace. Your shoulders would climb up toward your ears, your breath would go shallow, and your stomach would just drop through the floor. That is not anxiety. That's not weakness. That is not being overly dramatic. That is a nervous system that learned its job very, very early. And here's what nobody told you then, and what most people still aren't telling you now. That nervous system is still doing that job in your body right now, decades later. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly where it shows up in ways most doctors have never connected to your childhood. But first, let me tell you what this felt like from the inside. My name is Jennifer. I am a strength coach and licensed clinical mental health professional. And I specialize in working with people whose bodies are still paying for a childhood they never chose. The weight gain, the inflammation, the exhaustion, the nervous system that never fully regulates. I also grew up in a chaotic home, an alcoholic home. And I am going to talk about both of those things today because they are not separate stories. If you grew up with a parent who drank too much or used drugs or was emotionally unpredictable or whose moods ran the entire household, or if there was chronic conflict, neglect, or kind of tension that nobody named but everybody felt, this video is for you. And if your childhood looked fine from the outside but felt like anything but that on the inside, this video is also for you. Because what I want you to understand by the end of this, and I mean truly understand in your body, not just your head, is this. You are not damaged, you are patterned, and patterns can change. Let me tell you what it felt like in my body as a child growing up. I can remember this feeling exactly. My father was the alcoholic in our family. My mother was a different issue. But I remember this exact moment. I remember waiting for my father to come home at 5 p.m. from work. And I would know from a young child, if he didn't come home by 5 o'clock, there was a high likelihood that things were not going to go well. 5:15 came, I would feel my chest tighten. 5:30 came, I would start to feel nauseous. 5:45 came, I would get severe buzzing inside my head. Then I knew things were not, it was going to be a rough night. I didn't have any words for it until I was about 23 years old, but I remember reading two books, Toxic Parenting and Adult Children of Alcoholics. And I remember thinking, they literally wrote this book about my whole life. My relationships at the time, they were also chaotic. I literally grew up in chaos and I married chaos. And when I started to see these patterns repeat, and I saw my mother and my father in my current life, but it wasn't my mother and my father, it was my current relationship. And I saw myself and my mother. I saw myself becoming this bitter, angry, resentful person. And at that point, that's when I was like, I have to do something to change this because this outcome is just going to repeat itself. I want to stop here and say something directly to you. If you are watching this at this moment and you are recognizing yourself in any part of what I just described, I want you to hear this. I believe you. Whatever you felt in that house, whatever your body did to survive it, I believe you. Because one of the cruelest things that happens to people who grow up in chaotic homes is that they spend the rest of their lives being told that what they experienced wasn't that bad, or that they were being too sensitive, or that they are hypochondriac, or that they are just weak or undisciplined, and that's why they can't lose the weight, or that they just need to move on and stop being so dramatic. And everybody has tough times. Have you ever felt like your body was working against you? Maybe the weight wouldn't move, or it moved and then came right back. Exercise left you more exhausted than when you started, and chronic pain that nobody could ever fully explain, or therapy that maybe helped and then hit a wall. If any of that sounds familiar, I want you to hear this because That is not failure. That is just information that your body is sending you. And every one of those things is your body trying to tell you something. And what it is trying to tell you is this: something happened, and it happened early, and it is still running in your system. The weight that won't move is not a discipline problem. It is a nervous system that never received the signal that the body was safe enough to let go. The exercise that wipes you out is not weakness. It is a stress response piled on top of a stress response that never resolved. The chronic pain in your neck or your upper back or your jaw, that's not in your head. It is decades of bracing held in tissue. And the therapy ceiling, that is not failure of work. That is the limit of what words can reach. Your body is not broken. Your body is keeping the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously wrote. And until someone helps you read what it is actually keeping score of, nothing changes. Not the weight, not the energy, not the pain. This is what growing up in a chaotic home does to a body. Not just emotionally, but physiologically and measurably. And it is the thing almost nobody is talking about. Knowing why you are dysregulated doesn't regulate you. The body needs evidence, not just an explanation. And here is the part I wasn't prepared for, the part that made everything else make sense. None of what you tried was wrong. All of it was just incomplete. What was missing wasn't more effort or understanding. It was the right layer, the physiological layer underneath everything else. And that is what I want to show you today. Here is what was actually happening in your body while you were bracing in the bedroom or scanning that face for a threat or listening for footsteps. Your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, your HPA axis, was activating. Your body was releasing cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate was climbing. Your digestion was shutting down. Your immune system was suppressing. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus, learning, and memory, was going offline. This is why I couldn't do my homework. This is why I couldn't retain information that I was reading. This is why the classroom felt nearly impossible for me for some days. My brain was not in learning mode, it was in survival mode. Now, here's the part that changes everything. When this happens occasionally, say, for example, you almost get hit by a car, your body activates, handles that threat, and then returns to baseline. That is the system working perfectly. But when that threat response is activated repeatedly, chronically, over years, especially during childhood when your nervous system is still developing, the system stops returning to baseline. It recalibrates and sets a new normal. And that new normal is stay ready, stay braced, because something could be coming at any time. This is called allostatic load, and it is measurable in the body. We can see it in elevated inflammatory markers, C-reactive protein and interleukins. We can see it in dysregulated cortisol panels, high when it should be low or low when it should be high. Mine was chronically flatlined. This is also known as adrenal fatigue. We can also see it in HRV, heart rate variability, the measurement of how flexible your nervous system can respond to stress. We can see it in the gut, because the enteric nervous system, your second brain, is in constant communication with your stress response. Decades of chronic threat response leave fingerprints, and those fingerprints show up in the body at 47 years old or 54 or 64. And people can't understand why they can't lose weight, why they can't sleep, why they are always inflamed, and why they are exhausted but wired. Now, here's the part that took me the longest to understand, the part that made my own story finally make complete sense. Now, I want to tell you about something about generational transmission, because this is where it gets even bigger than your story or mine. For example, my father, he grew up in Czechoslovakia. He was born in 1939. He was actually born here in the United States, but his father died in a mining accident, and his mother at the time was left with 2 other young children, so she decided to go back to Czechoslovakia to make a life for herself because she couldn't do it here on her own. My father was 2 at the time. He ended up having a stepfather, and the stepfather was not kind to him and his two brothers. Throughout my father's young life, he also witnessed his older brother step on a mine and was killed. This was around World War II. His other older brother was taken by the Russians. Sounds like a story that's unbelievable, but he was taken by Russians as an interpreter because he spoke multiple languages, and he was used during the war to be an interpreter. And my father, who was the youngest, had two brothers disappear, and he was left at home with a stepfather that wasn't so kind, and two now stepbrother and stepsister. And he was there to deal with everything that was going on without the tools. He ended up moving back when he was 16 or 17 to the United States, and he left his mother in Czechoslovakia because he pretty much couldn't take it anymore. So he came to the United States, met my mother, they got married. They didn't have the tools. There was nothing that helped my father, when he came here to be able to function. Everything that he went through was unnamed and it was untreated. My father most likely had form of PTSD, if not CPTSD. He probably started drinking at a very young age. And I'm not saying this to disregard what happened, but also to understand the generational lineage that can continue if we don't understand it. So to preface, basically a mine exploded in Czechoslovakia in 1947, and the shockwave from that, through unprocessed grief, through alcohol, through a household that had no tools, traveled throughout time and landed in my nervous system. That is not a metaphor. That is epigenetics. That is intergenerational trauma transmission. That is science. Research shows that children of trauma survivors, particularly those exposed to chronic stress in early childhood, show measurable differences in stress hormone regulation, immune function, and inflammatory response. Your body is not malfunctioning. Your body is carrying history. My father was a semi-professional soccer player, especially in Europe back then, but when he came here, but he wound up diabetic, metabolic syndrome, neuropathy in his feet, congestive heart failure. Let me tell you what I see sometimes with my clients. Women come to me with symptoms they have been dismissed for years, fatigue that labs can't explain, weight that won't move despite doing everything right, or inflammation that does not always have a clear cause, or sleep that never feels restorative, or a body that feels like they're working against them. And I find out more often than I care to count how many women have undiagnosed Hashimoto's. Women with trauma histories are diagnosed with autoimmune disorders at significantly higher rates than men, and at higher rates than women without trauma histories. This is not coincidence. This is a body that has spent years in a threat response with an immune system that has been chronically suppressed and then chronically reactive, eventually turning on itself. I don't diagnose that, but I know what I'm seeing, and I know who to send these women to for a proper diagnosis. And the most important thing I do before I send them, before I do anything, is I say this: I believe you, because nobody really says that to them. They all think that they're crazy. I want to tell you how the cycle breaks, because it does break. I approve of that, and it takes work, but it is possible to do. I went through every emotion with both of my parents. Fear, anger, confusion, hatred, avoidance if I needed to, sympathy, empathy, detachment with love. I went through all of it. My mother died when I was 28. Thankfully, the 2 years prior, we were able to come to some understanding, which gave me peace in my life. Yes, she was controlling and emotionally manipulative, but even that had a generational pattern to that and why she was the way that she was. Her death was very unexpected, and I did a lot of grieving at that point, but it was a different type of grief. A grief of a loss of something that I didn't have with her that I wish I would have had. And then also, like I said, I married chaos. I knew I had to leave that life. I knew I had to avoid that dynamic. And it's amazing when you grow up in chaos, how often you repeat the cycle. And it just continues if you're not aware. And breaking that cycle, yes, it's difficult, but it's totally possible. And I was able to do it, finally, and have the courage to make a very different change. Yes, built a business, went back to school, became a therapist, grew this business, worked with over 1,500 women. Why? Because I saw the patterns, not just with myself, but with so many people who grew up in this type of environment. And here is the intervention that changed my body, both physically and somatically, when nothing else worked. It wasn't a diet, not a detox, not white knuckling my way through some type of program. It was simply weight training. I started lifting weights at 25 years old, and what I did not understand then, but understand completely now, is that I was giving my dysregulated nervous system something it had never had before: a controlled stressor, a challenge with a beginning and an end, and proof that my body could do hard things and recover, a place where bracing was a skill, not a wound. Resistance training has measurable effects on cortisol regulation, inflammatory markers, insulin sensitivity, sleep quality, and critically, HRV, which I'm hoping mine gets better. It also builds muscle, and muscle is metabolically active tissue that improves glucose disposal, supports hormonal balance, and creates the physical resilience that a dysregulated nervous system has been borrowing against for decades. For women or men over 40 or 50 who grew up in chaotic homes, strength training is not vanity. It is literally medicine. But here's what I need you to understand, and this is the most important thing I will say in this entire video. You cannot out-diet a dysregulated nervous system. You cannot out-exercise a body that believes it is still in danger. And you cannot hate yourself into healing. The work has to start with biological readiness, with bringing your nervous system out of chronic threat, with reducing inflammation, with sleeping, with building a body that finally feels safe enough to change. That is not a detour from fat loss. That is the only path to it. And I want to be honest with you about where I am, because I have come a far way, but I am still a work in progress. My gut is finally working. I am 5 years into genuine calm, the first sustained calm of my life, and my body is starting to trust that. My HRV is still low. I'm still working on rest, but I know what I'm working with now. I have words for it. I have tools, and I have the understanding that this is not a character flaw, that this is a physiological inheritance, and I am a cycle breaker, which means you can be too. So if you grew up in a chaotic home, whatever that looked like for you, I want you to know that your body's response was intelligent. It was adaptive, and it kept you alive. And it is not too late to teach it something new. I want to give you something before you go. Not a program, not a plan, just one thing you can do right now, in this chair, in this room, that gives your nervous system physical evidence that it is safe. Sit in a chair. Reach your arms forward like you're passing something to someone seated across from you. Let your upper back open. Feel your shoulder blades spread apart. Let your head drop slightly, jaw loose, completely relaxed. Now take a breath in through your nose, not in your belly, not lifting your chest, okay? But put the breath in your back. Feel it, your mid-back expand. Feel like it's going through your sides like you're opening umbrella. And when you're full, take in another small sip of air and place the air between your shoulder blades. That's your posterior mediastinum. That space has been locked and braced for decades. Just hold that for a moment, then exhale slowly from the bottom of your belly upwards, like you are emptying from the floor up. Let the exhale be 4 times longer than the inhale, all the way out until there is nothing left. Do that 3 times. You are not doing that to calm down. You are doing that to give your nervous system proprioceptive evidence, physical, felt real and to stimulate your vagus nerve that your body is capable of something other than bracing. That is what affirmations cannot do. That is what insight cannot do. That is your body beginning to learn something new. So tell me in the comments, what symptom were you dismissed for? I read every single one. You survived a childhood that required all of this. Now you get to build a body that doesn't.